Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Crypto News Podcast. It's your host, Matt Taylor. We are buzzing as always. And I think today we have, I want to say the fifth or sixth Matt to come on the show. Fun fact, folks, there's actually a Telegram group called the Mattyverse. Matty, I don't know if you're in that or not, but there are, I want to say there's 380 Matts in the crypto sphere that is in that name. Again, you have Catholic parents and you were born probably similar age to Matt and I. In those similar years, your parents named you Matthew because I guess just your good old Catholic boy. But anyways, c'est la vie. Time for the intro. Today we have Matty Taylor, co-founder of Colosseum. Previously, Matty was the head of growth at the Solana Foundation. Ever heard of it? Where he kickstarted the Solana Hackathon program in 2020. For the past 3 years, that program cumulatively resulted in over 60,000 participants and 4,000 projects launched. Wowza. And 600 mil in venture funding for winners. That is absolutely bonkers. The top Solana ecosystem founders from Tensor, Squad, StepN, Jito, and dozens of other leading projects got their start through the Solana Foundation hackathons. He also previously worked at 0x Labs and Square, which is now Block. Pumped to have another Matt on the show. Matty Taylor, welcome to the show, my friend. How you doing?
Good, man, and thanks for inviting me. Yeah, I think I've gone by Matty most of my life because there's been so many Matts in the world. So hopefully I'm your first Matty, and happy to be here.
You are. I get called Matty a lot too, more from the hockey days growing up when you're either because when you play hockey you just throw a Y on your first name or last name and that's your nickname. So I want to start not about Solana and not about Colosseum. That's the bread and butter in the show. We're going to get into that. But as part of my DD, whenever I have a guest on, I have to lurk their Twitter. That's where all the gold is. And you had a tweet, I want to say 4 or 5 days ago, and it put a massive smile on my face as I also do this. You are one of the few people, and I will read the tweet. Matty goes, does anyone else arrive at the airport a few hours early and quickly pace from one end of the terminal to the other repeatedly while listening to podcasts? This literally had me lolling as I thought I was the only sick puppy. I get looks from people when they see me. Why is this curly-headed goober walking around the airport getting steps in while we're all chilling and drinking? And I absolutely love that you do that.
Yeah, man. It's good to know that, when I put out that tweet, there was, several people that, jumped in and said we do this exact same thing. So next time I see one of you in the airport, I'll just give you the salute, on the same team, doing the same thing. So yeah, it's just, I don't know, like if you're going on a long flight, it's helpful to kind of clear your mind, get your steps in, and listen to some good podcasts. So yeah.
And how I see it is like there's 3 activities to do at an airport, really 2, and then ours is the third, walking. But you either work or you drink. Like yes, you can read, but I'll put that in the sort of the working sector of that. But if I have a 5-hour flight, I'm definitely getting the Wi-Fi package, and I'm hauling ass. I'm working for 5 hours, so an hour of pacing around and getting a 5K in at the airport. I think it's well worth it, but story for another day. Let's jump into it. Before we get into Colosseum, which is incredibly cool, by the way, and congrats on the launch. I'd love if you could tell us about your journey working for Solana, being the head of growth, and all the incredible opportunities that you had, the companies that you got to work with, and if you have any great stories of sort of seeing companies from an early hackathon and maybe just knowing that these guys have the sauce, these guys are going to be it, these guys and gals, are going to be it. I'd love any and all stories you have from your days at the Solana Foundation.
For sure, man. So I guess, my journey started in college. So I really got into Bitcoin, wrote my undergraduate thesis on Bitcoin. And I was pretty much a maximalist, I would say, until, I learned about Ethereum and, really became convinced that, a smart contract blockchain that could, enable all these other use cases that we talk about today was going to be really important for the world. And so as you mentioned, I worked at Square after graduation, and then I jumped to a project called 0x, which is one of the first decentralized exchanges on Ethereum. Kind of got a front row seat to the beginnings of DeFi and how sort of Ethereum and EVM chains were intending to scale, which sort of led me to my current interest, which is Solana. And I joined the Solana Labs team in 2020, shortly after they went to mainnet. Helped kickstart some of the growth initiatives there. And so To be honest, yeah, I mean, my time, working at Solana Labs and the foundation was pretty chaotic, just because no one really knew about Solana when I joined. There were only a few developers in the ecosystem, and so we spent a lot of time doing a bunch of experiments on how to convince developers to build on Solana. And it was honestly really hard to build on Solana initially. It's gotten a lot easier over time as the developer experience, tooling, that whole ecosystem has been built out. But you may have heard the term kind of like chewing glass. So a lot of developers really needed to chew glass in the early days to actually launch an application on the network. So yeah, obviously one of the big initiatives that I've been leading has been our hackathons, and that's what we're continuing to work on with Colosseum. But there's been so many teams that have come out of that program, and it's sometimes difficult to know in the moment because it's so early on which ones are going to become important in the ecosystem or not. But I mean, I think there were some pretty clear, obvious ones that I've talked about in other podcasts. But one that I don't think I've talked about is this project called Sphere, which is built by this founder named Arnold, who basically is sort of building an on-chain version of Stripe. And, they're sort of leading the charge in the ecosystem on enabling, fast, cheap, blockchain-enabled transactions. And so they were a winner several hackathons ago, and it was just pretty clear that they were going to really execute and grow the at least the payments vertical quite a bit for the Solana ecosystem. And so, yeah, pretty excited about what they're working on, and they're great founders. So, yeah.
Could you sort of tell us and walk us through what goes on at these hackathons? I've been to a couple, mostly around the Toronto area, and these, again, I don't have the technical ability that these builders and coders have, but these guys are literally just dialed in, like so beyond dialed in. Energy drinks, coffee, tea, Chipotle being delivered, and just so focused on building. Almost, it's like they're in their own little world. Nothing from the outside world matters. Sometimes for 24 hours at a time, working with a team and building incredible things so quickly. Like, what are the vibes like? What's the energy like at these hackathons?
Yeah, this is a good question because I have no idea because they're not in person. So one thing important to know is that while we call what we're running, which is essentially a startup competition, a hackathon, it's very different than a traditional hackathon that you may have attended in the past. And so we recently published a guide about this that kind of covers the differences between our hackathons and traditional hackathons. But at a high level, one, they're always online, and they've been that way since the very start. And so that's I think one of the reasons why they've scaled to be so large and the largest in the world in terms of participation, like venture funding, and et cetera. And so they're always going to be online. It allows them to be scalable. It also allows us to run them for much longer. So instead of a 48-hour sort of sprint where you're drinking a bunch of Red Bull and like trying to create just a proof of concept, which inevitably is going to be a very ephemeral experience because you just don't have enough time to create anything meaningful in terms of a product. And so our hackathons are roughly 5 to 6 weeks. So much more akin to an actual engineering sprint in terms of like what you can produce as an initial product. And also that relates to like the demo that you produce at the end of the hackathon during the submission process. So those are some two obvious differences. And then the third difference, which is also really important, is that, we don't necessarily want to tell people what to build. We have some ideas about what we think would be cool product ideas, but we want builders, developers, founding teams to come in with their own creative ideas and, build the products that they want to focus on for the next 5 to 10 years. And obviously like raise venture funding around it after the event. And so, yeah, it's structurally very different than a hackathon, although we think of it just an evolved version of a hackathon. So hopefully that kind of covers like some of the differences.
I love that. I'm a big fan when a company has a very sort of quick and sometimes sexy, sometimes unsexy, just punchline, sort of like a value prop. What are we? What do we do? Sort of like the executive mission statement. And I could be completely wrong on this, but doing research for the show, it seems like you guys are creating the Y-Combinator of Solana. Like you guys are letting really incredible ideas, company startups come in, build something via the hackathon. And if they work some magic, you guys help them get VC funding. And then not only, don't just let them go like a traditional VC, you guys are going the Y-Combinator route and literally nurturing them all the way up till launch and even past that. I'd love if you could give the elevator pitch on Colosseum and sort of talk about how you guys are building the Y-Combinator of Solana.
Yeah, well, we've certainly heard that comparison a lot early on as we've just launched in the last couple of weeks. We're pretty flattered by that, and I think we have a lot of work to do to live up to that sort of legacy. And honestly, like we, long term don't really want to be compared to, Y-Combinator because we think we have a very differentiated model on what we're trying to do. This specifically built for the crypto industry and Solana in particular. And so at a high level, you can think of, Colosseum as sort of a traditional accelerator like a YC, except instead of a college-style written application, you have to go win our 5-week hackathon to be considered for the program. So we feel that model is a much better indicator of potential founder and founding team talent than a traditional like written application. And so we're going to be running these hackathons that we have been doing for the past 3 years at the Solana Foundation. We're basically going to be continuing to administer those in a similar fashion. And then we're adding on, 2 extra pillars, which is the accelerator, which I mentioned, and then a venture fund, right? And so the venture fund we raised will be deployed to, these hackathon winners. So we'll choose up to basically 15 teams per hackathon to accept into the accelerator and invest $250K in each to help basically get them to the point where they can go from DevNet all the way closer to mainnet, where they can sufficiently pitch seed investors and raise a proper venture fundraising round. So that's the goal of what we're trying to do, and we feel like it's a big gap, at least in the market right now, that we can fill and help support these talented founders.
I love that. And my apologies if this is a bit of a weird question here, but are you guys still like directly involved with the Solana Foundation? Like I know Solana Foundation obviously does hackathons. That was literally your job at the Solana Foundation. You helped nurture and find and grow a bunch of incredible companies. But right now, like what does your sort of relationship look like between the two of you?
Yeah, so there's a couple touch points. Colosseum isn't a fully independent organization, but there's 2 particular touch points that we have. One is that the Solana Foundation is an LP in our venture fund. So they have invested in the fund itself, as well as we have a commercial agreement with them to basically continue administering their official hackathon. So we will basically be taking the reins in terms of like administering these events. We have one that's just started by the time this podcast has come out. It's called Renaissance that they're running with them. Yeah, just small plug if you're a builder out there, please register at colosseum.org for that event. It should be pretty big, and it gives you the opportunity to potentially join our accelerator program. So that's the relationship between Solana Foundation and us. The other obvious thing is that we are focused on Solana. Generally, we feel very strongly that most of the growth in terms of applications and the ecosystem around them will happen on Solana over the next several years. And so we've basically decided to focus all of our efforts on that particular ecosystem. And it also helps us like modify the accelerator experience quite a bit to help really embed the founders in that particular ecosystem rather than going multi-chain and kind of diffusing the experience across many different L1s or L2 ecosystems. So hopefully that explains it.
Yeah, no, that's so needed too. One of the headlines that I've seen is that Bonk DAO made a first of its kind investment in Colosseum, giving back to the ecosystem builders. I mean, this is just, no pun intended, but this is bonkers. Like Bonk comes out of nowhere, absolute shitcoin. You definitely know more about Bonk than I do and its potential utility from my very basic low level knowledge. I just think it's a shitter and a great shitter, mind you. But And then I read this and I'm like, holy shit, Bonk DAO is giving back to a company that is literally helping with hackathons, accelerators, creating a venture fund to give back to builders. And this is done by Bonk DAO. How did this whole thing start? Like, I'd love to get the whole story on this because this is absolutely incredible.
Yeah, this was pretty surprising to us too, to be honest. We were reached out to by the Bonk DAO Council, and they had been looking for ways to use their treasury to help support the ecosystem. And so Bonk, from my perspective, is not your average meme coin. It's not just some asset that has a meme attached to it that goes up and down. There seems to be a lot more actual development around it. I mean, it's probably one of the most integrated tokens just into the Solana DeFi ecosystem. They have this thing called BonkBot. There's this whole community of people building actual applications with it. It's an interesting project, and they felt that investing, becoming an LP in our fund would be maybe the best way to give back and help continue grow the ecosystem that they're in. And so they actually held a vote to decide whether to invest or not, and we accepted. After they voted to accept their LP commitment to the fund, and so. Yeah, pretty interesting. I've never heard of this happening before for another venture fund. So definitely uncharted waters, but we're excited to fulfill and help fulfill the vision that they have, which is growing the startup ecosystem on Solana and helping founders get off on the best foot. So. Yeah.
That was the whole Bonk run, the dog whiff hat run. I mean, these Solana shitters just came out of nowhere and picked up crazy steam. And I'd love to keep buzzing on the Solana ecosystem, but we need to take a quick break and give a huge shout out to our sponsor of the show. That is Prime XBT, longtime friends of cryptonews.com and longtime sponsors of the Crypto News podcast. Prime XBT offers a robust trading system for both beginners and professional traders. It doesn't matter if you're a rookie or a vet, you can easily design and customize your layouts and widgets to best fit your trading style and take advantage of Prime XBT's highly reliable market data and performance. Prime XBT is also running an exclusive promo for listeners of the Crypto News podcast. Use the promo code CryptoNews50, that's CryptoNews50, all one word, to receive 50% of your deposit credited to your trading account. Again, that is CryptoNews50 to receive 50% of your deposit credited to your trading account. Now back to the show with Matty. Matty, I'd love to jump right into the Solana ecosystem as a whole here. You were literally in the trenches, in the weeds, unlike myself, who was just in the, in the grandstands up in the 500 section looking down. I had a bit of soul and I, rode it up all the way and luckily got out a little earlier. But I'd love for you to talk about just how tumultuous and how crazy Sol's sort of rise and fall and then rise was with, FTX and the Solana. It's one of the sort of most unique and crazy stories of crypto over the last couple of years. And I mean, you were literally directly building in the space. How bananas was this whole thing?
Yeah, it's been quite a ride, but I mean, a very, very fulfilling one. It's been awesome to be part of this ecosystem. And, obviously, when the market is hot, everyone is interested in what is being built. And so we saw a huge influx of folks come into the ecosystem in 2021 and early 2022. And, some of those folks were not in it for, the long term. And they weren't necessarily, interested in actually building applications that led to, crypto adoption globally. And so we, while the FTX implosion and some of the founders leaving the Solana ecosystem was, tough in the moment, it actually, strengthened the network over time and was definitely a crucible moment in terms of, the at least the startup ecosystem where, we were continuing to run these hackathons and the number of participants and quality founders coming in actually just was increasing as the price of Sol was going down. And so there was obviously this mismatch between public perception of what was going on in the ecosystem and the strength of the technology versus, the craziness of public prices in crypto. And so, I think it's every large L1 ecosystem has gone through sort of a crucible moment like that, right? Like Mt. Gox and Bitcoin, the DAO and Ethereum,
Yeah.
Both of them had issues, technologically early on, and so I think that moment for Solana, was inevitably going to happen. To get to the next level of adoption, and so I think we're seeing the fruits of that right now, where the developer ecosystem and founder ecosystem is stronger than ever. Hackathon submissions are all-time highs, and we'll see how it turns out with Renaissance, but we're based on the activity on the Colosseum platform in terms of the number of registrations and people trying to find co-founders and building products, we think it's stronger than ever. So yeah, pretty exciting to see this come together in 2024.
Are we anywhere close to the top here? I'm not even talking about price, because this isn't a price prediction pod, but I just mean the growth of Solana. It's been vicious. It's been vicious in the best way possible since, I want to say end of summer, the last 5, 6, 7, 8 months. It's not just the price has gone up, but the sentiment, the number of incredible builders coming in and choosing to build on Solana. Like, it seems like there's no end in sight. As someone who's literally in the weeds, what's your 2 cents on that?
I mean, I believe crypto generally is going to be a millennia technology, potentially. And so, I think we're very, very early on in crypto's evolution and therefore Solana's evolution. I mean, Solana just went to mainnet in 2020. That was only 4 years ago. Very early days for crypto generally, but also Solana specifically. And so, I mean, you can look at comps of just like how many people are building on chain versus all the software developers in the world, or you can look at, how many social media users there are in Web 2 versus how many, people are using non-custodial wallets, and it's a very small percentage, 1 to 5%. So I think there's a ton of room for growth left. There's a ton of room for innovation and experimentation, and that's why Colosseum exists, right? If we're near the top in terms of crypto development and startups, then there's no reason for Colosseum. We want to help support, the next era of sort of category defining products in crypto, and ultimately those products leading to bringing the world's markets on chain. And so that's what we're trying to make a small dent in.
I love that. And speaking of categories, are there any specific areas of Solana-based products, for lack of a better word, we'll call them products, but protocols, whatever you want to call it, DeepIn? I know you guys have been buzzing in the DeepIn space, DeepIn-based Solana, AI-based Solana, very trendy right now. Any in particular that really tickle your fancy?
I mean, there's several, and this sort of mimics our categorization of tracks in our hackathons. So we have 6 different use case tracks across DeFi, DeepIn, gaming, crypto infrastructure. And so we're looking pretty broadly around teams that are building in all of those categories. But for me personally, I think you mentioned DeepIn. That's really interesting right now. And we've seen some interesting DeepIn projects out of our last couple hackathons. So there's a team called Shaga, which basically enables folks to tap into this global network of gaming rigs, essentially, if you don't have a gaming rig yourself. So you can play, a really high fidelity game without actually owning the machine. And
that's
so
wild.
That's pretty interesting. Another one sort of in the same vein is, there's this project called io.net that came out of our second to last hackathon called Grizzlython. They've basically built a network that aggregates all of these GPU clusters around the world, whether they're from data centers or latent crypto miners, and basically services them up to people in the AI industry who need to inference models, essentially.
Wow.
And so obviously with things like NVIDIA not being able to create as many chips and produce as many GPUs, there's this global shortage. And so how can a DeepIn network sort of aggregate the supply side to match the burning need on the demand side? And so we are very much looking for more instances of that, of like, where are opportunities where there's so much demand, but resources need to be more efficiently supplied on that side of the equation, and how can a DeepIn network sort of aggregate that and service it up to the demand? And so we're really excited about that, and that's why we have a dedicated DeepIn track in the current hackathon.
That's so cool. You guys doing anything in the social network space? This is something, Matty, that, I mean, it seems it's very front of mind. It's such a big part of everyone's lives right now. Tons of teams have been trying to build a social network in and for the crypto sphere. And we've really seen nothing that's popped off yet. I'd love to get your opinion on, do you think this is possible? Do you think it is the right place to do this on crypto? Because me personally, I think it'd be incredible. And I think it'd be one of the only ways using crypto to actually reward people who are using it, unlike the traditional route where it's just, if you bring a lot of views, you get paid kind of thing. What do you think about that?
Yeah, social is really interesting. And there's a bunch of different experiments happening right now around it. There's obviously the sort of angle of approach that says like, hey, people should have more self ownership of their own data, right? Versus the model that we have today, which is, all of your data basically is owned by Facebook or Twitter and they live in their servers, right? And you have no basically control over that. And that leads to downstream problems around like creator, revenue, right? Like there's this huge problem where the take rate for a lot of these networks like YouTube or Facebook or Instagram, where, the creators who are driving most of the usage of these platforms and engagement aren't actually getting paid. Potentially they're not their fair share. And so there's a variety of different approaches to that. So there's like a popular one right now. We'll see how it turns out, called Farcaster. This is not in the Solana ecosystem, but they actually are integrating components of Solana soon. And so they're seemingly kind of focused on this data ownership and better creator monetization route. But then I don't know how that's going to play out. I think that's speaking to a specific type of audience that really cares about that. But it seems like most people in the world don't care about owning, their own data. They're fine using things like TikTok and Instagram. And you can see that. I mean, like billions of people use these applications and most people don't have a problem with it. And so I think these applications that focus on that could have interesting, adoption and definitely interested to see that more in our hackathons. But the more interesting thing, and this kind of relates to why we're excited about crypto generally, is that it opens up new markets, right? And so less about just putting TikTok on the blockchain and more about how can you create some sort of market that's novel around social media. And so there's, things like friend tech, which we didn't think was particularly sustainable. And I think that's proven to be the case, but things more in that line where people can bet on either the outcomes of specific social media events, sort of like there was a project called Kizzy in our last hackathon that was a winner. It's basically sort of a DraftKings for social media that was really interesting. And so, just how can you create sort of novel markets around things happening in the social media world, whether that's investing in, the influencers themselves, events that the influencers are creating, engagement, and that's a whole, green field of opportunity that we'd love to see more experimentation with.
Yeah, well said. Crazy untapped. Matty, this has been an absolute treat. Before we let you go, you and I were shooting the shit before the show. You might have some news to drop before you leave today regarding a hackathon.
Yeah, so I mentioned this a few times, but hopefully this podcast is released after the 27th, because we are announcing basically the start of our next hackathon with the Solana Foundation called Renaissance. It's going to run from March 4th through April 8th. And this will be the first hackathon where we're going to be basically choosing winners and then, selecting a subset of those winners to join our accelerator program and invest in them. And hopefully this will, usher in the next sort of wave of breakout startups in the Solana ecosystem. And so we're excited to see what people build. And, you can join by going to colosseum.org/renaissance and registering for an account on Colosseum. And looking forward to seeing what people build.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but $250K to the winners?
So the way that it works is we'll roughly take, we'll choose 30 to 40 winners based on how many individual prizes there are. And then that basically guarantees you an interview with us, myself and my two co-founders, Nate and Clay. And then we will basically do another round of evaluation to determine who are the top 10 to 15 teams that we actually invest in $250K each and accept into the program. So as I mentioned before, you can think of Colosseum as sort of YC for Solana, but instead of a college-style written application, you got to go win our hackathon to be even considered in the first place. So,
big money up for grabs, folks. We absolutely love that. Matty, this was an absolute treat. Really appreciate your time and you coming on here. Before you go, can you please let our listeners know where they can find you personally and everything Colosseum related online and on socials?
For sure. I mean, I live on crypto Twitter, crypto X, where the epicenter of our industry lives. And so you can find me at Matty Tay, and then you can keep up to date with what we're doing with Colosseum at Colosseum.org. Colosseum spelled the Roman way. So, yeah.
Colosseum the Roman way. Love that. Folks, what an episode with Matty Taylor, co-founder of Colosseum. We got into a little bit of everything Colosseum related, Solana hackathons, growing the Solana ecosystem, some prizes, a great story about Bonk DAO, some great stories from the Solana hackathons, deep in, you name it, we touched it. Huge shout out to Matty and the team for making this happen. If you guys enjoyed this one, and I hope you did, please do subscribe to my team. Love you guys. Thank you for everything. Eustace, you are the man as always. And back to the listeners, love you guys. Keep on growing those bags and keep on staying healthy, wealthy, and happy. Bye for now, and we'll talk soon.